Oh, okay. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the, nice to see you all. Welcome to the third part in the webinar, Monet Through Forge, looking at the work of Claude Monet through the lens and words of Andrew Forge and his monograph on Monet. Thank you all for joining me, and it's great to see you all here, and thank you also for the donations. It means a lot. Appreciate that very much. Before we get into the next section, there was a question that I was asked about color, the way color functions. It was something that I read in the beginning of last week's webinar. And so I'd like to go over that again and just speak it out a little bit. So let's see here. It's on well, let's see, 69. He starts discussing, let's go to this. Let's go to speaker view. Okay. So on page 69, Andrew Forge is discussing Claude Monet's process as an impressionist. The palette is cool rather than warm, reflecting the artist's interest in reconstructing the quality of outdoor light rather than studio light. To put it another way, aerial perspective, how things change as through atmosphere, through distance, is removed from the realm of studio convention and studied as an actual phenomenon, as an event in color relationships. So if you think of like Claude Lorraine, and he's got, you know, looking at a landscape, and as things recede, they lessen in darkness, they're lighter and lighter, and the contrast lessens. So everything gets closer in a light value and things recede. And we kind of developed that from the time of the Renaissance, and it became a kind of convention, how to use this when you make a painting in a studio. The Impressionists wanted to study what things look like in actuality, outdoors, in color. This is the marvel that produces the Impressionist palette, the insight that the whole visible world can be reconstructed on the level of color. Color, pure, variegated, shot, can take on the quality of light, not by the traditional schema of light and dark tonalities, but by its simultaneous interaction on the picture surface. Think of Caravaggio. And so we have a sense of dark and light and form through basic structure, through chiaroscuro and darks and lights, very dramatic. Let's go to, I want to do a screen share of an image. This one. So here we have, move this over, and here is an early landscape. He started to do the painting outdoors and impressionist work, and you can see the way he's here. Well, let me continue. The question of the colors of shadows preoccupies the impressionist painters. It is the very area that academic art conventionalizes through modeling and the generalizing power of the dark ground, conceived as darkness or the absence of color. The Impressionist pigeon grays, gunmetal greens, violets, lavenders, lilacs, cornflower blues do not depend on their darkness to work as shadows, but on their crisp interaction with the warm elements that make up the other half of the equation. So here we have this lilac, and then we have this light, bright yellow. And if we saw a black and white reproduction of this painting, I mean, we would understand it, but it wouldn't have this sense of of light that we're getting from the interaction of the purple to the yellow. So it's here, the transitions of light into shadow become transitions of positive color, never a degradation of the light. So this is color, just as this is color. And it's the interaction of color on the canvas that is giving us that sense of light. And there is, of course, this, an awareness of the value. This is a bit darker, clearly, and this is darker as well. And so things are in their place. But the emphasis or the reliance, the traditionally, from the time of the Renaissance, you would create your sense of form and space and light through chiaroscuro, through dark and light, through value, and the color came on top of that through glazing. It may have moved us around the rectangle, but there was a decorative aspect of the way color worked. The construction of space and light was through the darks and lights and values. In an Impressionist painting, the construction of space and light is reliant on color much more than value. So a different way of going about building an image. Okay. Now, whoops, that's not what I wanted to do. Let's go back. And let's go out of here, stop share. Okay, here we are. All right, so that's about color. Now, we're gonna move into the next chapter here, chapter 4. And Andrew's gonna be looking at composition and how composition becomes meaningful for Monet in his larger project. Let's see. Okay. Monet's working travels of the 80s were indeed campaigns, heroic raids in which he pictures himself pushing into the unknown, suffering the privations of battle, annexing whole provinces. It is as though there is no limit to the hunger of his eye or the magic potency of his brush. Maupassant's hunter is a kind of magician too. He references, Andrew Forge references in an earlier chapter, Maupassant was an author who wrote a book about Monet and describes him more as a hunter than a painter, the way he would go and capture and get his paintings. Maupassant's hunter is a kind of magician too. He grabbed hold of a downpour beating on the sea and threw it on the canvas. And indeed, it was the rain he had painted this way. Nothing but the rain shrouding the waves, the rocks, and the sky, barely distinguishable under the deluge. That was a quote. Surely this is more than literature. Somehow it matches a facet of Monet's own fantasy, a facet of which the underside is his despair that he has missed, failed, not risen to the occasion. Often the failure can be laid at nature's door. I'm working a lot, but the more I go on, the more trouble I have in bringing a study to a successful conclusion. And at this time, when nature is changing so much in appearance, I am forced to abandon canvases before they're completely finished. But the terms of the situation are of Monet's own choosing. He could have stayed at home. It would seem that his anxiety about completion, an anxiety that is like the inescapable shadow of his conquering ambition, doesn't turn on the problem of how to transform a sketch into a picture in the older sense. That is, like Corot and before him, they would have their sketches and they'd go back into their studio and turn it into a nice, slick salon painting. That wasn't his problem. so much as on how to bring out and substantiate those very characteristics that caused the painting to be taken for a sketch in the first place, right? How to make more enduring and substantial the aspects of spontaneity, immediacy, the mark, present tense, those things that one finds in a sketch. He wanted to create a fuller painting with those very things. He tells Duran-Ruel that he has his own idea of finish, but it is not the same as the public's. Has nothing to do with a licked surface. Freshness, speed of observation, fleetingness had somehow to be locked into a structure developed over a period of time, reworked, subjected to internal criticism, a structure whose very purpose was to sustain the qualities of phenomenal immediacy that had been, until now, uniquely the domain of the sketch. So phenomenal in the sense of phenomena, of the immediacy of observing the world as it is, straightforward, directly. How to bring that into a painting that has a fullness. Monet's correspondence makes it abundantly clear that he expected to go on with his paintings in the studio, although he was reluctant to say as much publicly. The physical evidence of the picture surface suggests that these reworkings were often substantial and protracted, far more than mere finishing touches. The nearly simultaneous alla prima impressionist brushstrokes are lost now in a densely layered crust of paint, in which, through a new repertoire of twirled and dragged strokes, the later layers of paint are woven into earlier ones. More complex color is worked into the earlier, simpler layers in different qualities of thick and thin, opaque and transparent. The process is extended. Paint surfaces range from wet to half wet to dry. Lower layers offer a rough, toothy surface across which fluid strokes skip and scrub. Half-dry paint is teased by a later brush. No doubt the origins of this exceedingly complex repertoire of texture and mark lay in tribulation, frustration, and labor. But Monet was very quick to turn second thoughts and corrections to his advantage and to seize from the potential chaos a unique painterly language. Let's put on an image here. Showing all possibilities. Show all windows, thank you. Nope. All right, close this and share. There we go. Okay. Okay, here we go. Thank you. Let's get it. We need to imagine a frame of mind in which the content of the sketch is somehow held apart from the act of sketching itself, right? The content of the sketch, the immediacy, the speed, the the engagement, the marking, the sense of observation, all of these, the sense of improvisation, all of this is the content of the sketch, and how to bring that to a more sustained painting. This implies a certain distance from the headlong experience, out there, caught in the wind, caught in the unsatisfactory dialogue between palette and out-of-doors light. A distance that allowed for reflection, but without the sacrifice of immediacy that second thoughts so often demand. So it seems to me that what Monet is doing is he has trained himself through his outdoor campaigns. He has learned that frame of mind that he cultivated and nurtured repeatedly outdoors over those decades, so that when he would sustain the painting indoors, he was able to conjure that frame of mind back up and wield it in the studio. Also, it seems to me that there's an aspect of this frame of mind, the sense of immediacy, that we see his influence not only in plein air outdoor painting, but in abstract expressionism, action painting, the moment, the immediacy. I think we find in that whole world of painting roots in Monet, in his not just his gesture, but in his attitude. Academic art tells us that knowledge takes precedence over experience. Academic art tells us that knowledge takes precedence over experience. In other words, what I know and how things are, that's what I'm relying on when I go to make a painting. The conventions of perspective, linear perspective, aerial perspective, all of these things that had been developed for hundreds of years from the time of the Renaissance. This is knowledge, and this is what I'm relying on when I go to make a painting. That's academic art tells us that knowledge takes precedence over experience. Romantic art, which means all serious art since 1800, says the exact opposite. Experience becomes the important factor here. What's my actual experience? But the moment it proclaims sovereignty of experience, it is inserting intention between the impulse and the deed, right? I have an impulse and I go to paint, but that impulse occurs through a schema. All experience, as I reflect on it, occurs to me, or I find the experience as I reflect and I move through and I understand my experience through some kind of understanding. There's no reflection on experience that's simply raw. That might occur in the moment, but as I go and use that experience, as it becomes part of my engagement as a painter, it takes on a narrative, it takes on a story, it takes on some kind of intention. The rubric of intention allows the romantic artist to find metaphors for what he is doing. I will paint as if I am able to see instantaneously. I will paint as if I had never seen another picture, and so on. Without that as if and its enabling fiction, he is condemned to indulgence and self-parody. I'm just putting paint around. I'm just fooling around. I'm just making a picture. With the as if, I'm finding my as if through my inside. This as if comes out of what's real for me, so that the painting starts to become an activity that's relying on an as if that is real for me. And then I'm able to really engage. And then it's not just indulgence and self-parody, but an activity that resonates because I'm able to really drop into it. Without that as if and its enabling fiction, he is condemned to indulgence and self-parody. Armed with it, he could begin to see himself and to move himself to genuine strenuousness. Psychologists have often reminded us of the horrible shock Monet would have had if he had really been able to see the messages that came in through his eye. But by claiming that this was what he was painting, Monet was able to spin a content for his efforts, a thread of intention that led him deeper and deeper in the development of his pictures, which were not real showers of rain, as Maupassant pretended on his behalf, but constructions to be read. So for all of us painters, the location, what's my as if? What's my intention? What am I believing as I'm making marks and I'm inside that rectangle? What's occurring to me, as I'm moving through the space and marking? How does that add up? And then the painting starts to develop its real presence. Under the sign of plein airism, the whole matter of composition takes on a new quality, an ambivalence involving the motif as well as the painting. Okay, so we'll go back to sharing. So this painting is called, if I can say this in French, oh, it's got an English too. Road to Louvancienne, melting snow sunset. Route à Louvancienne, neige fondante, soleil couché. I don't know. I have no idea how to say that. Involving the motif as well as the painting, choice and selection as well as construction. Where am I painting? How am I standing? No longer linked to narrative order or to a principle of appropriateness, right? We're not doing history painting, and pretty much everything's now open to become a motif for me if I want. The organizing factor now is not a known order of pictorial construction, but a physical viewpoint. This, in a sense, becomes the subject matter, my physical viewpoint. And we can follow Monet's recognition of this shift in value from the 60s to the end of his life. So now Andrew Forge is going to start talking about the position of viewpoint, how it impacts composition, and how that opens up into a deeper content for Monet and Monet's paintings. So we have point of view, viewpoint, physical place. moving into composition, and composition creating a painting that leads Monet into a deeper content in his work. To our eyes, familiar with his later work, the paintings he made from the Salon of 1865, let's see if we can get that here. Nope. Yeah, that one. Okay. From sketches of the Seine estuary at Honfleur look composed to an extreme degree. Every seagull, every rock, the angle of every mast, all are fitted into place to make a harmonious whole. But this is composition from the outside and has more to do with a notion of pictorial decorum than with the vision of the studies on which it was based. Only a few years later, 5 years later, a typical Impressionist study, such as Route à l'Ouvassienne, Effet de Neige, of 1870, convinces us that every feature of the composition derives from the painter's own standpoint in front of the motif. It is the painter himself who is at the center. We know exactly where his feet are. The foreground of the picture seems to drop below the edge of the canvas to where he is standing, somewhat to the right of center. The right and left boundaries of the canvas assert a decision, a framing action over against the focus of the road. So the way how he's deciding to cut here and here, there's a framing action that's occurring that counteracts this pull in. The road rushes away like an arrow, its target the vanishing point dead ahead, and the nominal focus of the painter's gaze. The painting is constructed as though the whole scene radiated from that single point of focus. The artist's position is implicit in every measurable feature of the picture: the height of the horizon, the geometry of the directions of every edge, the edges, angles of incidence, the intervals of the verticals or their alignments, pinpointing his position in space. The great crossing of horizontal and vertical is a location within the depicted world of the painter's eye. So this whole, how everything is placed, we have a sense of the person standing, looking. It's us as we're in there. To paint directly, to follow the rules of the plein air game, means to start with what is given from a particular position. Occlusion, the cutting off of a far form by a nearer one, and the alignment of forms in different planes in space become crucial factors of construction, as any photographer knows. These effects have little significance in studio painting, where every relationship is invented at will and nothing is given. But for the open-air painter, they are binding. When he moves, his subject moves. The overlapping of every feature reminds us that his motif is what he sees. The attention he gives it is the measure of the importance he attaches to his point of view over all other possible ones. He could look in any direction. So his act of definition is charged with a sense of the openness of his field, as well as the precision with which his attention is focused and offered up to the boundaries of the canvas. What makes a motif? The major ingredient will be the painter's sense of pictures. What can I paint? What's a good picture? I'll pick a motif according to what I think a picture is. That accumulation of images in his bones, that investment that makes him a painter. The power of the down-the-road type of motif, of which route à la Wolfson, effet de neige, is an example, can be described on a succession of different levels. At the most local level is the circumstance that the landscape painter will need to find a convenient place to stand. Not to mention maybe, a loo that's nearby. That's my words. Not too far from his lodgings. There, he said it. At the other end is the road's seeming universality. Whether the painter looks up the road or down it, the configuration of the road in perspective will be the same, a rough, compelling triangle driving to the horizon, flanked in various ways with houses, walls, trees. However humble the particulars, there will be something here that calls up a version of a grand landscape construction, an array of vertical intervals linked by diagonal movements in perspective. Each new motif will be like a discovery and a return, but a return in which familiarity and recognition are the occasions for more particular discoveries, for finer nuances or more outspoken declarations. We sense this in Monet's habit of repetition, the way he not only will tackle a motif in pairs of versions, but will go back to it a year or a decade later, a lifelong practice of which the series of the 1890s and 1900s were simply a formalization, marking a late stage in his explanation to himself of what his art was about. Each encounter with a particular motif adds its increment of meaning to that configuration and sows the seed for further encounters with that place under other conditions or with other places whose strangeness is like a challenge in which novelty and stirred memory press against each other for dominion over the imagination. Each encounter with a particular motif, I'm just repeating this, adds its increment of meaning to that configuration and sows the seed for further encounters with that place under other conditions or with other places whose strangeness is like a challenge to which novelty and stirred memory press against each other for dominion over the imagination, as they do with any of us as we walk from the station through the streets of a city we are visiting for the first time. God, he writes so beautiful. Okay, now we're going to move. Let's see what we got here. That's the earlier painting. Oh, and we got some interesting, I threw these in, they're in the book, and they really fit how he's finding new motifs. This actually was in the Denver Art Museum not so long ago. We had this one with us, and it was like, wow, what a crazy painting, and just lovely. This one. Again, it's like, how is, whoops, let's go back. Come here. This, how is that? How did he write? That's a motif? Wow. Wow. Okay. Let's see. Now we're going to go, I want to go too forward. Back to, okay, we'll go back to that one we spaced through. Oh, maybe we'll start there. We'll go to this. Okay. So now we've got another section here where Andrew Forge is shifting. I'm skipping a little bit, and he's talking about how the sea and painting the sea becomes an important motif for Monet. With the sea as motif, the canvas has a different value from the one it has in a perspective view. The latter represents a single eyeful. We picture the canvas rather precisely as cutting the painter's visual cone at 90 degrees, right? Looking down that road. But an empty expanse cannot be thought of like this, right? The openness of the ocean. The observer's sense of being at the center of perspective for the down the road is replaced by an ever open invitation to movement, reorientation, and fusion. When Monet painted a sea populated with boats, he was working in a well-established marine tradition. But already by the late 60s, he had been sufficiently affected by the Japanese woodcut to be capable of visualizing the sea as a flat, frontal block of color, parallel to the picture, as in the terrace. That's what this painting is. We have this, here we have this block of color. Whoop. By this time, he would have known Courbet's Marines and those of Whistler's too, in which the empty sea, whether dominated by a single wave or conceived as a cool band, is shown as a simple, irrefutable image of infinity. This view of the sea, reduced to its minimal formal elements, became a model for a host of other subjects, opening up the possibility of composition that was, above all else, parallel, frontal, and embracing. So when we think of, as Monet develops, we think of the late water lilies, we think of so much of what happens in late Monet. The possibility of composition that was above all else parallel, frontal, and embracing. Monet rediscovers the sea in all the frontal approaches to landscape, looking across the Epte or the Creuse to its far bank, paintings in which all movement is lateral and the canvas itself seems to take up the part of the flowing water. He rediscovers it in a painting like La Salle of 1885, which I don't have a reproduction of. I'm sorry, there isn't one. In which water, riverbank, water meadows, distant poplars, and sky cross the canvas in horizontal, luminous bands. It is surely the sea and the pictorial thoughts attendant on the problem that the sea poses that teach him how structure and inflection can be found within very narrow limits, whether a mass of more or less uniform foliage or in fog. It is the sea, surely, that points to the redistribution and spreading of focus that is such a feature of his later work. An experience of space without pathways. And the sea that suggests those extraordinary manipulations of geometry that brace his most open paintings. Vêtu dans le brouillard, that's this, of which Faré had told Monet that it was too white and so unfinished as to be not serious. A painting in which hardly anything is to be made out at all proves, as we look at it over a period of time, to be not only completely there, completely realized, but to be founded on rigorous architecture. We discover, built into the opalescent mantle of fog, itself an impossible color, bluish pink, yellowish violet, a mysterious and transparent skeleton of which the bones are little more than hints of accents, yet precisely felt and playing a profound role in the organization of the painting. The faintest breath of cobalt establishes a kind of strut out of the top right corner. Locating that corner of the frame and at the same time driving back to the horizontal row of pale warm smudges, that is vêtue. Right, this brings us back to this. Another such strut, very slightly warmer, braces the bottom right corner. The struts are so faint as to be hardly visible at first, but once they are seen, their action in the painting is indisputable. Under their influence, the accents of the houses and their intervals are measured in toward the left corners with a certain trembling precision. Far from being unfinished, it is a painting that has been worked over for a long time, a painting in which every visible feature has been worked through. What do these mysterious struts represent? Nothing at all in a literal descriptive sense. Nonetheless, one cannot doubt that they are seen essential parts of the texture of the painting, in which observation from the subject and reading of the picture are woven together like the warp and woof of a tough fabric. One senses in features like these a kind of awakening in Monet to his own process of seeing, or rather to processes within the action of painting that return his seeing to himself, so that through his painting he is seeing in relation to the making of the painting, and it's no longer something he's just, it's not a passive mechanical experience of receiving through his eyes. There's a dynamic of his seeing that occurs through his making of the painting. Among the categories of viewpoint and aspect I have been discussing, this is clearly a frontal, out-to-sea subject, painted from his floating studio or some point on the opposite bank. Vêtue hovers in front of us. We cannot approach it by connected pathways, but only lose ourselves in it, immerse ourselves in the fog that immerses it. Nor can we retreat to the certainty of the painter's exact position. His viewpoint is everywhere. The canvas is witness to that. Vêtue looks back at us. Somehow the boundaries between subject and object, viewer and viewed, have become porous, open to a two-way exchange. The campaigns of the 80s produced landscapes of a completely new type. Paradoxically, all signs of Monet's concern with the modernity of his subject matter vanish. There are no more railway trains, no more iron bridges or factory chimneys, no more city folk in fashionable clothes. The places he paints are often well-known holiday resorts or beauty spots, but there are no trippers on the beach at Etretat any more than later there are farm workers or threshing machines around the haystacks or communicants on the steps of the Rouen Cathedral. His thoughts about the present and its relationship to painting were taking him in a different direction. It was no longer modern life that preoccupied him as it had over the Boulevard des Capucines or in the echoing turmoil of the Gare Saint-Lazare, but that slot of now, flickering between anticipation and memory, the present itself. No painter had ever approached that brink as closely as he was doing, for it was his own experienced present that was the issue, not another's imagined present. No painter had ever approached that brink as closely as he was doing, for it was his own experienced present that was the issue, not another's imagined present. There was no example to help him. He had burned his bridges as far as the culture of pictures was concerned, committing himself utterly to his here and now. Yet the closer he approached that endlessly unrolling moment of presentness, closer he approached that endlessly unrolling moment of presentness, the more extended his contemplation of it. The painting insisted on this paradox. Yeah, wow, just fabulous, right? I mean, Monet, he was an ambitious guy. He was a worldly guy. He was a guy, right? And through painting and through perception, he lands into this experience of exploring the present moment. And of course, the present moment is endless. And the painting insisted on it. So now painting becomes a practice of contemplating the present moment. And of course, I think of Agnes Martin, I think of Milton Resnick, I think of the abstract expression, I think of Pollock, de Kooning, Rothko, Reinhardt. Yeah, they're amazing. And yeah, well, okay. Are there maybe any questions that people might have or thoughts? If anyone wants to respond, we've got some time now, a few minutes. Anybody?
I had a question.
Who's that?
I had a question.
Diana? Hi.
I've just been thinking while you've been talking a lot about, I don't even know how to say this, but he seems to understand ecology,
Uh-huh.
which was sort of a new, and actually while you were talking, I looked it up, and they coined the term in 1869.
Oh, interesting.
And just the idea that he has a sense, instead of things being photographic, he has a sense of flux and time, which, so I guess curious your thoughts on how, if somebody's coining that term. And I keep thinking of that image of the river where, is it Camille or what's the?
Camille.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And his technique, it's almost more real how he can paint water.
Mm-hmm.
But then he, like the flowers are just sort of a spot, but then the water looks really real.
Mm-hmm.
So throughout your lectures, I've been trying to even figure out how to say in words. It seems like his technique is almost more realistic, but of the whole over some time. I don't know if that makes any sense. Yeah. I guess I was just curious if anybody's written about ecology, and you can actually, listening to you, you can almost describe a whole way of looking at the world that's completely different. So it's just a philosophy.
Right.
If you don't understand all that, you wouldn't be able to even, he just shows a totally different way of looking at the world.
Yeah, and I think it came through the painting. Exactly. I think the painting led him there.
Yes. And a lot of his paintings, I feel like, water is like certain things, or how, and also how man fits into the image. When you were showing the picture of the painting of the road, that how does man relate to the trees, or the painting you showed of the trees where the houses are behind it. Like, where does man fit into the environment? Right. I don't know. This whole time I've been trying, I'm a climate change scientist and an ecologist, so I've been trying to, I feel like that's what I hear.
It's a system, right?
I'm interested. I don't know if anybody's written anything on this.
Yeah, I don't know.
I'll have to look.
Okay, thank you. Any other thoughts, questions? The more I looked at that last painting, the more I saw images and motifs popped up that I hadn't seen originally. Yes. Thanks, Marion. Yes.
I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yeah, who's that?
That's Sue.
Hi, Sue. Oh, hi, Sue.
Picking up on Diana's comment, you were reading a quotation, I think it was a quotation of Monet in Forge's book, where I think, if I understand this correctly, Monet is saying, I'm abandoning canvases all the time because nature keeps changing. It's changing too quickly. And I guess the most obvious reading of that is like the time of day is changing, or the season is changing.
And the weather, yes.
But I also want to hear that there's a sense of nature and the environment changing itself in the middle of the 19th century.
Oh, interesting. I don't know. I assume it was probably more practical.
Yeah. But in retrospect, it's hard not to hear that as having a kind of almost prophetic insight to it.
Yeah, right. I hear that. Yeah. Thank you. Anyone else? Other thoughts or questions?
Jordan, I have one. This is Dave.
Yeah. Hi, Dave.
Hey, how has Monet impacted your work? This is more of a personal question. How has has his attitude towards painting impacted you more than the technique? Or what part of Monet has really impacted you and your development?
I mean, I guess I could say what part hasn't impacted me. because so much of my painting practice comes out of Monet. But I sort of do it indoors. I mean, I also paint outdoors, but I'm wedded to perception, to the experience of perception more than the depiction of what I see. You know, it's sort of like I'm finding his motif of fog, you know, in my studio interior, you know, and just that response to my perceptual experience as a way of exploring the present moment.
Right.
So yeah, that whole thing, I mean, it's pretty great. You
Yes.
know, and all of this was happening for me, you know, I mean, I'm sure it was influential, not just Monet's paintings, but understanding Andrew Forge's understanding of Monet's paintings, and Andrew being a teacher of mine. And so there was just this sense of, I don't know, momentum for me in some way. What else, where to go somehow, but it just happened organically for myself. Anyway,
Right. Okay.
other thoughts or questions?
Jordan,
Yeah, hi Karen.
hi, how are you?
Okay.
Something that you said I wrote down because it like was really blowing my mind is that in his late work, he was seeing through his making of the painting, which is what you've been talking about. And so consequently, it made me, just the thought of that, if you're seeing through the making of your painting, then the painting is changing you. And there's this like give and take
Yes.
between you and the painting, this back and forth of
Yes.
Which is like such an amazing thought to me, that this paint, the life of this painting is, you know, that it has this life, this ability to change you.
Yes.
Which is like freaking me out. It's such a great thought.
And that's the deeper importance of a painting practice.
Right.
It's not about making pictures.
Right.
It's about changing our lives, about becoming more fully alive.
Yes, exactly. I've always told people, well, I do this to experience life more deeply.
Yes.
And that's like, this is like, whoa.
But it's not just in the terms of self-expression that we normally think of.
Yeah.
It's how the painting, like you said, how the painting changes me. I wouldn't be the same person I am now by a long shot if I hadn't been living all these years through painting.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. If you just try to imagine your life as never having been a painter.
Something else, some other life.
Yeah. Some other person, some other life,
absolutely.
some other world.
It changed me. Yes.
Yeah. Wow. It's an amazing thought.
Let's see, we've got some chats here. You're very welcome, Jacqueline. It's a level of perception and openness to that perception that you have to arrive at, it seems. Yes. It's a level of perception and an openness to that perception. Yes. Thank you, Carol. Okay, let's see. Well, a couple of other thoughts that I wanted to share before we wrap up. Let's go to this. So, you know, I've I find it in the times we're in, but actually generally, there's a precision and a poetry and a clarity and a truth to Andrew Forge's words that I find there's a kind of a comfort in them, actually. It clarifies it, and there's something comforting in the clarification. And of course, I'm so deeply grateful to the insight, to the language, to what it gives me as a painter, to reflect back not only on Monet or anyone else that Andrew Forge is writing about, but what am I doing? You know, what am I doing? And I don't mean that in terms of like, why aren't I doing more? I mean, as in, gosh, I wonder what I'm actually doing. Might be interesting. So I wanted to mention that. Also, I am interested in, there's a number now. This is sort of a wrap up. I mean, I think we've sort of launched from here. You can start to think about from here how he moves on to all of his series and the late water lilies and so much of what happens for Monet. Kind of set it up in these 3 webinars and these pieces from the monograph. It's a fabulous book. I really, really highly recommend. Let me just show it again if you haven't seen it. It's a beauty. It's a great book. A lot of black and white reproductions, but a lot of color too, and a phenomenal text. So I'm interested in offering up a webinar on Morandi, on Soutine, on Titian. But I don't think I'm going to be able to do it every week for a while now. I'm not sure what the rhythm will be. Maybe every other week or every 3rd week. I've got to start focusing on some of the other things that are up that I need to take care of. But I will be sending out notices when they're coming up, and hopefully in a couple of weeks there'll be another one. Thank you again, all of you, for joining me, and the donations have been very helpful and very, very appreciated. And I have online courses and some online intensives that are coming up at jordanwolfson.com. You can find them. Take a look if you're interested. Stay well, stay healthy, stay sane as we figure out how to live with this, I think is really what's coming up now. Keep painting, keep drawing and painting, and we'll be in touch, and I'll let you all know hopefully in the next couple of weeks when the next webinar will be. Thank you, and take care, everybody, and be in touch. Okay, bye-bye.